I have always found a quiet comfort in the predictable rhythms of my life. For 40 years, my world has revolved around the comings and goings of my husband, Jonas. He is a charismatic and successful sales executive, a man who moves through the world with an easy, confident charm that has always made me feel both safe and, if I'm being honest, a little small. My life has been a supporting role in his grand production, a fact I accepted long ago. I am Alice, 62 years old, and I have always considered myself a fragile, dependent woman, a perception that Jonas has, over the years, carefully and lovingly reinforced. He treats me with a kind of gentle, paternalistic care, as if I were a delicate porcelain doll that might break if handled too roughly. If you're watching, please like and subscribe to the channel and tell me in the comments where in the world you're from. So, when he came to me on the morning of Halloween, his face a mask of weary resignation, I was not surprised. Disappointed? Yes, but not surprised. "Alice, my love," he began, his voice a low, apologetic murmur. "Something has come up. A last-minute emergency with the new client in Chicago. I have to fly out this afternoon. I'm so sorry." I looked at the packed suitcase by the door, a suitcase that had clearly been packed the night before. I looked at the feigned spontaneity of his announcement, and I did what I always did. I smiled my gentle, understanding smile. "Of course, my dear," I said. "Work is work. We'll be fine." We, in this case, included our 8-year-old grandson, Leo, who was staying with us for the week while his parents were on a second honeymoon. Leo adored his grandfather, and the promise of a Halloween spent trick-or-treating with Jonas had been the highlight of his week. The disappointment on his small face when I told him was a sharp, painful pang in my chest. "But Grandpa promised he would help me carve my pumpkin," he said, his lower lip trembling. "I know, sweetie," I said, pulling him into a hug. "But his work is very important. We'll have our own fun, you and I promise." Jonas left in a flurry of apologies and promises to be back as soon as he could. He kissed me on the forehead, a brief paternal gesture, and then he was gone, leaving me and Leo alone in the large, isolated house that had been our home for the past 20 years. Jonas had always insisted on living here, miles from the nearest neighbor at the end of a long, winding country road. He said he valued the privacy, the quiet, the escape from the city. I had always found it a bit lonely, but I had never questioned his decision. I had never questioned any of his decisions. As the afternoon wore on, I threw myself into the task of creating a perfect Halloween for Leo. We carved his pumpkin, its toothy grin a cheerful, defiant beacon against the encroaching dusk. We baked cookies shaped like ghosts and bats. We hung fake spiderwebs in the doorways. Leo, in his superhero costume, was a whirlwind of excited energy, his earlier disappointment forgotten. But as night fell, the atmosphere began to change. The sky, which had been a clear, crisp blue all day, turned a bruised, ominous purple. The wind began to howl through the tall pine trees that surrounded the house, their branches scraping against the roof like skeletal fingers. And then the rain began, a hard, driving deluge that lashed against the windows. We were in the living room, a bowl of popcorn between us, about to watch a silly Halloween movie, when the lights flickered once, twice, and then died, plunging us into a sudden, absolute blackness. Leo let out a small, frightened gasp. "It's okay, sweetie," I said, my own heart beginning to beat a little faster. "It's just a power outage. The storm must have knocked down a line. It happens all the time out here." I found the emergency candles I kept in a kitchen drawer, and, with trembling hands, I lit them. The room was filled with the soft, flickering glow of candlelight, casting long, dancing shadows on the walls. The house, which had always been a symbol of safety and security, suddenly felt vast and dark and full of secrets. "We need more light," I said, my voice brighter than I felt. "I'm sure your grandfather has some flashlights in his office." Jonas's office was his sanctuary, the one room in the house that was strictly off-limits to me. He always kept it locked. He said he needed a space where he could work without interruption, a place where his important documents would be safe. I had always respected his privacy, but tonight, the locked door felt less like a boundary and more like a barrier, a wall between his world and mine. If you're watching, please like and subscribe to the channel and tell me in the comments where in the world you're from. "I don't think we can get in, Nana," Leo said. "Grandpa always locks it." "Well," I said, a strange, uncharacteristic flicker of defiance rising in me, Tonight is an emergency. I retrieved the small silver key from the top of the kitchen door frame, the spare key Jonas kept just in case. A key I was not supposed to know about. As I slid it into the lock of his office door, I felt a small, illicit thrill. I was crossing a line, entering a space that had been forbidden to me for 2 decades. I had no idea that I was not just opening a door, but that I was about to open a Pandora's box of secrets that would shatter the fragile, carefully constructed world I had lived in for my entire adult life. The unexpected, I was about to discover, had only just begun. Jonas's office was exactly as I had imagined it, masculine, ordered, and impersonal. A large mahogany desk dominated the room, its surface clear except for a sleek, closed laptop and a single framed photograph of him and me taken on our wedding day. The walls were lined with bookshelves, filled not with the novels and poetry I loved, but with row upon row of bland, leather-bound business texts and technical manuals. The room smelled of old paper, leather, and something else, a faint metallic scent I couldn't quite place. It was the room of a stranger. "Wow," Leo said, his eyes wide as he took in the forbidden territory. "It's like a library." "Let's find those flashlights, sweetie," I said, trying to keep my voice light, trying to ignore the strange, unsettling feeling of being a trespasser in my own home. We began to search. I checked the drawers of the desk, but they were all locked. Leo, meanwhile, was running his fingers along the spines of the books on the shelves. "These are boring books, Nana," he announced. "I know, my love," I said, turning my attention to a large oak filing cabinet in the corner. It, too, was locked. Everything in this room was locked, sealed, hidden away. A cold knot of a long, unacknowledged suspicion began to form in my stomach. What kind of sales executive needed this level of security? It was Leo who made the discovery. He was trying to reach a book on a high shelf, climbing the built-in library ladder like the little monkey he was. He slipped. His small body crashed against the bookshelf, and with a groaning, splintering sound, the entire, massive unit toppled forward, crashing to the floor with a deafening roar. "Leo!" I shrieked, my heart leaping into my throat. I rushed to him, my mind a slideshow of horrifying images. But he was fine. He had managed to jump clear, and was now standing, his eyes wide with a mixture of fear and awe, staring not at the pile of fallen books, but at the wall behind where the bookshelf had stood. The impact had dislodged a section of the drywall. Behind it was not insulation and wooden studs, but a dark rectangular void, a hidden compartment. My breath caught in my throat. "What is that?" Leo whispered. "If you're watching, please like and subscribe to the channel and tell me in the comments where in the world you're from." I didn't answer. I reached into the dark space, my fingers brushing against cold, hard metal. I pulled out a heavy steel box, the kind used for storing important documents. It was not locked. My hands trembled as I lifted the lid. I think, in that moment, I was expecting to find evidence of a sordid, ordinary secret, an affair, a hidden debt, the mundane, predictable betrayals of a long marriage. But what I found was so far beyond the realm of my imagination that my mind struggled to process it. The first thing I saw was a passport, but the name on it was not Jonas Miller. It was Jonathan Marcetti, and the face in the photograph, though clearly a younger version of my husband, was harder, colder, the eyes of a man who had seen things I could not even begin to imagine. Beneath the passport was a series of thick, manila envelopes. I opened the first one. Inside were stacks of old, yellowed newspaper clippings. The headlines jumped out at me, a language from a world I did not know. Marcetti turns state's witness in Falcone crime family trial. Key witness Johnny the Suit. Marcetti enters witness protection. Falcone boss gets life sentence on Marcetti's testimony. The Falcone crime family. I remembered the name from old news reports, a brutal, powerful mafia organization that had terrorized the city in my youth. And my husband, my quiet, charming, predictable husband, had been the man who had brought them down. He was not a sales executive. He was a ghost, a man who had died 2 decades ago, to be reborn as Jonas Miller, a suburban husband with a boring job and a fragile, dependent wife. My carefully ordered world began to tilt on its axis. Every memory, every shared moment of our 40-year marriage was suddenly cast in a new, sinister light. His constant travel, his aversion to having his picture taken, a quirk I had always found endearing. His insistence on living in this isolated house, miles from anyone, his obsession with security. They were not the eccentricities of a private man. They were the survival tactics of a man on the run, a man who was still being hunted. My blood ran cold. The emergency business trip to Chicago, the suddenness of it, the way he had seemed so tense, so distracted. It hadn't been an abandonment. It was a trap. Someone had lured him away. Someone from his past, someone who knew who he really was, and they had lured him away so that they could come here, for me, for Leo. A wave of nausea washed over me. I looked at my grandson, who was now sitting on the floor, happily looking at the pictures in a fallen art book, oblivious to the earthquake that had just shattered my world. And in that moment, something inside me shifted. The fragile, dependent woman I had always believed myself to be, the porcelain doll Jonas had so carefully protected, cracked, and from the cracks, someone else, someone I didn't recognize, began to emerge. A woman whose only instinct, whose only purpose was to protect the small boy in the superhero costume sitting on the floor. My eyes fell back to the contents of the box. There, at the very bottom, nestled in a bed of gray foam, was the source of the faint metallic smell I had noticed when I first entered the room. It was a gun, a sleek, black, semi-automatic pistol. I reached in and picked it up. It was heavier than I had expected. It was cold and hard and real. It was a piece of my husband's secret life, a life I had never known. And as I held it in my hand, I heard a sound that made my heart stop. It was the sound of a car engine coming up our long private driveway. The unexpected had arrived, and it was not a ghost or a goblin. It was something far, far more dangerous. The sound of the car engine, a low, guttural rumble that was distinctly not Jonas's familiar sedan, cut through the storm-tossed silence of the night. It was slow, deliberate, the sound of a predator circling its prey. I stood frozen in the middle of Jonas's secret office, the cold, heavy weight of the gun in my hand, a terrifying alien presence. My mind, which had been a chaotic whirlwind of shock and disbelief just moments before, snapped into a state of hyperfocus. The past was gone. The future was a terrifying unknown. All that existed was this moment, this house, and the imminent, nameless threat that was now crawling up my driveway. "Nana, what's that noise?" Leo asked, looking up from his book, his small face a mask of childish curiosity. "It's probably just a tree branch falling, sweetie," I lied, my voice a surprisingly calm, steady whisper. "The wind is very strong. I had to get him out of this room. I had to get him somewhere safe. You know what? I think I saw some marshmallows in the kitchen. Why don't we go make s'mores over the candles? It will be like we're camping." His eyes lit up, the allure of forbidden indoor camping instantly eclipsing the strange noise outside. "Really? Really," I said, forcing a smile. "Go on, I'll be right there. I just have to put these boring books away." He scampered out of the room, his superhero cape fluttering behind him. The moment he was gone, I moved with a speed and purpose I didn't know I possessed. I shoved the passport, the newspaper clippings, and the gun back into the metal box. I couldn't leave them here. They were evidence. They were my only connection to the truth. I slid the box under the desk, into the deep knee-hole space, covering it with a fallen stack of business journals. It wasn't a perfect hiding place, but it would have to do. I then went to the window, peering cautiously through the edge of the curtains. The car, a large black SUV with tinted windows, had stopped at the end of the driveway, just outside the circle of light cast by the porch lanterns. Its headlights were off. Two figures emerged, dark silhouettes against the rain-swept landscape. They did not look like neighbors seeking shelter from the storm. They moved with a kind of predatory confidence, their shoulders hunched against the wind, their gazes fixed on the house. My house. My heart hammered against my ribs. Jonas's past had found us. The ghosts of the Falcone crime family were no longer yellowed headlines in a box. They were here, on my doorstep. I backed away from the window, my mind racing. What would Jonas do? Jonas, the man of action, the man who had faced down mob bosses. But Jonas was not here. There was only me. Alice, the fragile, dependent wife, the woman who had spent her life arranging flowers and baking cookies, the woman who had never faced a crisis more serious than a burned roast. But as I looked around the dark, silent house, at the flickering candlelight casting long, monstrous shadows on the walls, a strange, cold calm began to settle over me. This was my house. I knew its every creak, its every shadow. I knew where the floorboards squeaked and where the doors stuck. I had designed the garden, I had chosen the furniture. I had raised a family within these walls. This was my territory, and I would not surrender it without a fight. I found Leo in the living room, happily arranging marshmallows on a skewer. "Okay, my little superhero," I said, my voice bright, betraying none of the terror that was coursing through my veins. "New game. It's called Super Secret Hide and Seek. I'm going to hide you in the best hiding spot in the whole house, and you have to stay absolutely silent until I come and find you. Can you do that?" He nodded eagerly, his eyes wide with the thrill of the new game. I led him to the small pantry off the kitchen, a deep, windowless closet filled with shelves of preserves and canned goods. It was the most secure interior room in the house. "Okay," I whispered, tucking him into the small space behind a rack of old blankets. "You are now invisible. No matter what you hear, no matter what happens, you do not make a sound, and you do not come out until you hear my secret password. The password is Starlight. Got it?" "Starlight," he whispered back, his face a mask of solemn concentration. I kissed his forehead, my heart aching with a love so fierce it was almost painful. "You are my brave boy," I said. Then I closed the door, plunging him into darkness. I stood in the silent kitchen, my ears straining, listening for the sound of their approach, and then it came. Knock, knock, knock. 3 sharp, deliberate knocks on the front door. It was not the friendly knock of a neighbor. It was the knock of someone who knows you are home, someone who knows you are alone. I walked to the front door, my bare feet silent on the cold wooden floor. My mind was a blank slate, my fear a distant humming noise. All I could think of was the small, trusting boy hidden in my pantry. I peered through the peephole. 2 men stood on my porch, their faces obscured by the shadows of their hoods. They were large, imposing figures, their rain-slicked coats making them look like grotesque parodies of Halloween trick-or-treaters. "Hello?" I called out, my voice, to my own astonishment, sounding calm and steady. One of the men looked directly at the peephole, his eyes cold and empty. "Good evening, ma'am," he said, his voice a low, gravelly rumble. "Sorry to bother you on a night like this. Our car broke down just up the road. We were wondering if we could use your phone to call for a tow." The lie was so transparent, so cliché, it was almost insulting. Their car had not broken down. They were here for a reason. They were here for Jonas, for his family. My mind raced. I had a choice. I could open the door and play the part of the helpless, accommodating housewife, or I could fight. And as I looked through the peephole at the cold, predatory eyes of the man on my porch, I knew that the woman who would have opened the door, the woman Jonas had married, was gone. In her place was someone new, someone I was only just beginning to meet, a mother, a grandmother, a protector. I took a deep breath, and with a conviction that surprised me, I spoke the first lie of my new life. "I'm so sorry," I said, my voice filled with a perfect feigned regret. "The storm knocked out our phone lines an hour ago. We're completely cut off." The game had begun. Claro. Continuamos a sombra na véspera de todos os santos, a partir do capítulo 4. There was a long pause on the other side of the door. The wind howled, and I could hear the 2 men murmuring to each other, their voices a low, indistinct rumble. They had not expected this. They had expected a frightened, accommodating woman, a soft target. My lie about the phone lines had introduced an unexpected variable into their equation. "Well, ma'am," the gravelly voice said again, a new, harder edge to it now. "Maybe you could just let us come in for a moment to get out of this storm. We're getting soaked out here." It was a test, a gentle, probing push to see how far I would bend. "Oh, I couldn't possibly do that," I said, my voice now a perfect imitation of a flustered, slightly paranoid older woman. "My husband is away on business, you see, and he's very strict about me not opening the door to strangers when I'm here alone with my grandson. You understand. A woman can't be too careful these days." I had just played my first card. I had established myself as a rule follower, a woman governed by her husband's authority, a woman who was weak and alone. Exactly the part I wanted them to believe I was playing. There was another longer pause. I could feel their frustration radiating through the thick oak of the door. This was not going according to their plan. "Look, lady," the second man spoke for the first time, his voice younger, more impatient. "We're not asking. Our car is just up the road. We just need to wait for the rain to let up." His tone was a mistake. It was too aggressive. It gave away their true intentions. They were not lost travelers. They were intruders, biding their time. "Oh dear," I said, my voice trembling with a perfectly feigned fear. I don't know. My husband would be so angry." I let my voice trail off, as if I were too frightened to continue. Then I delivered the next part of my strategy. "But there's an old barn at the back of the property," I said, my voice a conspiratorial whisper. "It's not locked. You could wait in there. It's dry. Just please, don't tell my husband I told you. He'd be furious." I was giving them a solution that served my own purpose. I was directing them away from the house, away from the immediate vicinity of my grandson, and into a location I knew, and they did not. The barn was old, filled with rickety, unstable structures, and a single, easily barricaded entrance. I heard them confer again. The barn was a better option than standing in the rain. It got them onto the property, closer to their objective, but on my terms. "All right, lady," the gravelly voice said. "The barn it is. But if you're lying—" "Oh no, I wouldn't do that," I said, my voice a picture of frightened sincerity. "Just follow the path around the side of the house. You can't miss it." I heard their heavy footsteps retreating from the porch. I stayed at the door for a full minute, my ear pressed against the wood, listening until the sound of their boots on the gravel had faded completely. Only then did I move. The fragile, frightened housewife persona fell away like a discarded costume. I was now on the clock. I did not know how long they would be content to wait in the barn. I had to assume it would not be long. I had to use every second I had just bought myself. My first move was to retrieve the gun from Jonas's office. My hand did not tremble as I picked it up this time. I checked the clip, a motion I had only ever seen in movies. It was full. I found the safety, a small, stiff lever, and I clicked it on. I would not use it unless I had no other choice. It was a last resort. My brain was my primary weapon. My next move was to secure my perimeter. The house, my beautiful, intelligent house, was about to become my fortress. I went from room to room, the flickering candlelight my only illumination, and I began to set my traps. I did not have weapons in the traditional sense, but I had a lifetime's worth of domestic knowledge. I had a house full of ordinary objects that could be repurposed for war. In the kitchen, I found a large bottle of cooking oil. I went to the back door, the one closest to the path from the barn, and I poured a generous, invisible slick of oil on the smooth, slate tiles of the mudroom floor. In Leo's toy chest, I found his collection of marbles. I scattered them across the dark, polished hardwood of the main hallway, a treacherous, unseen minefield for anyone walking in the dark. I went to the top of the main staircase. At the edge of the top step, I balanced a heavy cast-iron skillet, a tripwire of my own design, ready to be triggered by a single misplaced footstep. I was not just a grandmother. I was a guerrilla warrior, turning my own home into a landscape of treacherous domestic traps. I was using the very things that had defined my life as a homemaker, the kitchen, the toys, the tools of my domesticity, as the instruments of my defense. As I finished setting my final trap, a small, wicked smile touched my lips. They thought they were hunting a frightened sheep. They had no idea they had just walked into a spider's web, and I was the spider. The house was my web, and I was ready. The quiet of the house was a taut, stretched silence, pregnant with an unspoken violence. I sat in the dark of the upstairs landing, my back against the wall, the heavy weight of the gun a cold, reassuring presence on my lap. The candlelight from downstairs cast long, dancing shadows, turning familiar armchairs and tables into monstrous, lurking shapes. Every creak of the old house, every rattle of the windows in the wind, was a new potential threat. I was a bundle of raw, exposed nerves, but beneath the fear, a new, unfamiliar sensation was taking root, a cold, clear, and exhilarating sense of purpose. I was no longer a passive observer in my own life. I was an active participant in my own survival. I had been waiting for what felt like an eternity, but the clock on the mantelpiece told me it had been less than an hour. They had been patient, too patient. My ruse with the barn had bought me time, but it had also, I realized, given them time. Time to plan, time to strategize. The attack, when it came, was not subtle. There was no gentle knock, no polite request. There was only the sound of splintering wood as the back door, the one I had so carefully oiled, was kicked in. I heard a curse, a yelp of surprise, and then the satisfying wet thud of a large body hitting the slate floor of the mudroom. One down, at least for a moment. My first trap had been sprung. "What the hell?" A voice, the younger, more impatient one, snarled from the darkness. "It's like an ice rink in here. Shut up and find a light," the older, gravelly voice commanded. I heard them fumbling in the dark, their heavy boots slipping and sliding on the oiled floor. I had the advantage. This was my house. I knew its geography in the dark as well as I did in the light. They were blind. A beam of a powerful flashlight cut through the darkness, sweeping across the kitchen. I flattened myself against the wall, my heart pounding. They made their way out of the kitchen and into the main hallway, the beam of the flashlight cutting a nervous, jerky path in front of them. And then they hit the marbles. The sound was almost comical. A sudden, sharp clattering, a flurry of curses, and then the heavy, bone-jarring crash of the second man going down. He landed hard, his flashlight skittering across the floor, its beam spinning wildly, creating a dizzying, strobe-like effect in the cavernous hallway. "My ankle!" The younger one groaned in pain. "I think it's broken." "Get up, you idiot!" the older one hissed, his voice tight with a mixture of pain and fury. He had clearly fallen as well, though not as badly. They were now injured, disoriented, and angry. Their plan, whatever it had been, was unraveling. From my vantage point at the top of the stairs, I watched them. The older one, his face now visible in the erratic beam of the fallen flashlight, was a large, brutal-looking man with a flattened nose and a cruel, thin-lipped mouth. The younger one was still on the floor, clutching his ankle, his face a mask of pain. The older one found the flashlight and got to his feet, his movements now more cautious, more deliberate. He swept the beam of light across the floor, illuminating the scattered, colorful marbles. He let out a low, incredulous growl. "What is this? A daycare?" He kicked the marbles out of his way and began to advance towards the staircase, towards me, towards Leo. My breath caught in my throat. This was it, the moment of confrontation. I raised the gun, my hands surprisingly steady. The feel of the cold metal in my grip was a shock, but a welcome one. It was a solid, undeniable reality in a world that had become a surreal nightmare. He started up the stairs, taking them one at a time, his heavy footsteps echoing in the silent house. The beam of his flashlight danced ahead of him, a probing, malevolent finger of light. I waited. I let him come. 5 steps. 6, 7. He was halfway up the staircase when his foot found the tripwire I had created, a length of invisible fishing line I had stretched across the 8th step. The heavy cast-iron skillet I had balanced on the edge of the landing teetered for a moment, and then crashed down the stairs with a deafening, metallic clang, striking him squarely in the chest. He let out a roar of pain and surprise, lost his footing, and tumbled backwards, landing in a heap at the bottom of the staircase, the flashlight flying from his hand and extinguishing as it hit the wall. The house was plunged back into absolute darkness. The only sound was the pained, ragged breathing of the 2 men below. I had won the first battle. My house, my domestic, ordinary house, had fought for me. My knowledge of its secret spaces, its hidden weaknesses, its everyday objects, had become my arsenal. But I knew this was not over. They were injured, yes, but they were also cornered. And a cornered animal is the most dangerous kind. I sat in the darkness, the gun held tightly in my hands, and I listened. The symphony of chaos had ended, and a new, more terrifying silence had begun. The silence that followed the crash of the cast-iron skillet was a different kind of silence. It was not the quiet of an empty house, but the tense, charged stillness of a battlefield between skirmishes. The darkness was absolute, a thick, palpable void broken only by the sound of the storm raging outside and the low, pained groans coming from the bottom of the staircase. My traps had worked. I had wounded them, disoriented them, and most importantly, I had terrified them. They had come here expecting a soft target, an easy extraction. They had found a house that seemed to be actively, malevolently fighting back. From my perch at the top of the stairs, I strained my ears, trying to decipher their whispers. "This is a setup." The younger man's voice was a ragged, pain-filled hiss. "She knew we were coming. The old man, Marchetti, he set us up." "Shut up, you fool," the older one growled, his voice thick with pain. "He's in Chicago. We made sure of that. It's the woman, the wife. She's here." "The wife?" the younger one scoffed. "The file said she was a nobody, a housewife, a little, fragile bird." "Well, this little bird has teeth," the older one grunted, and I heard the sound of him trying to get to his feet, followed by a sharp intake of breath. The skillet had clearly done its job. I knew I had a limited amount of time. Their initial shock would soon wear off, replaced by a more professional, ruthless determination. They were killers. This was their job. They would adapt. I had to press my advantage. My plan had been to defend, to hold them off until I could find a way to call for help. But now, a new, bolder strategy began to form in my mind. I would not just defend. I would attack. I would not just be the spider in the web. I would be the hunter. I slipped away from the top of the stairs, my movements silent, ghost-like. I knew this house in a way they never could. I knew the loose floorboard in the upstairs hallway that groaned under any weight. I knew the back staircase, a narrow, winding servant's staircase that was hidden behind a paneled wall in the linen closet. It was a secret artery of the house, one that even Jonas had forgotten existed. I made my way down the back staircase, my hand trailing along the cool plaster wall until I emerged in the small hallway behind the kitchen. I was now on the same level as them, a predator moving on the periphery of their awareness. I could hear them in the main hallway, still trying to regroup. The older one was now using his phone's flashlight, its thin, weak beam a poor substitute for the powerful flashlight he had lost. "We need to find the breaker box," he was saying. "Get the lights back on. And we need to find the woman." I had to separate them. A united front was a threat. Two isolated, frightened men were just targets. I moved silently into the living room, the room where Leo and I had been just a few hours ago, in another lifetime. I found what I was looking for: Leo's collection of superhero action figures. I picked one up, a small plastic figurine of a caped crusader. From the shadows of the living room, I threw it. It sailed across the room and landed with a sharp plastic clatter in the far corner of the formal dining room. "What was that?" the younger one hissed, his voice tight with panic. "It came from in there," the older one said. "Stay here. I'll check it out." He moved cautiously into the dining room, the weak beam of his phone's flashlight cutting a nervous path in front of him. This was my chance. As soon as he was out of sight, I moved. I slipped out of the living room and into the main hallway, where the younger one was now leaning against a wall, his injured ankle propped up on a chair. He was facing away from me, his attention focused on the dining room, waiting for his partner's signal. I crept up behind him, my heart a silent drum against my ribs. I was holding the gun, but I knew I couldn't use it. The sound would give away my position, my advantage of surprise. I needed another weapon. My eyes scanned the dark hallway and landed on the heavy brass umbrella stand by the front door. Inside it was a collection of old, sturdy umbrellas, including my father's favorite, a heavy, oak-handled one with a solid, pointed tip. It would have to do. I lifted it from the stand, its weight solid and reassuring in my hand. The younger man was still looking towards the dining room, completely unaware of my presence just a few feet behind him. I took a deep breath, the air cold and sharp in my lungs. The fragile, dependent housewife, Alice Miller, was gone. She had died somewhere between the toppled bookshelf and the oiled floor of the mudroom. The woman standing in the hallway now, holding an umbrella like a weapon, was someone else. She was Jonathan Marsetti's wife, and she was a survivor. I raised the umbrella, its heavy oak handle a perfect, balanced weight in my hand. The eye of the storm had passed, and the second wave of my own personal tempest was about to break. The moment before I struck was a pocket of absolute, crystalline silence. The world seemed to slow down, the sound of the rain, the wind, my own frantic heartbeat, all of it fading into a distant hum. There was only the man in front of me, a silhouette of oblivious menace, and the heavy, oak-handled umbrella in my hand. I was no longer afraid. The fear had been burned away, replaced by a cold, primal, and deeply satisfying clarity. I was a mother protecting her young. There is no force on earth more dangerous. I brought the umbrella down with all the strength I possessed. It was not a clumsy, panicked swing. It was a precise, calculated blow, aimed directly at the back of his head. The solid oak handle connected with a sickening, hollow thud. The man let out a grunt of pained surprise, his body stiffening for a moment, and then he crumpled to the floor like a puppet whose strings had been cut, landing in a silent, unconscious heap. I didn't wait to see the extent of the damage. I didn't have time. I could hear the older one in the dining room, his voice calling out, "Anything? Did you find anything?" I had to move, fast. I dragged the unconscious man's body, he was surprisingly heavy, into the small, dark space of the coat closet under the stairs. I closed the door, my hands fumbling with the old iron latch in the dark. "Marco, you there?" the older one called out again, a new note of urgency in his voice. He was coming back. I looked around frantically. I was trapped in the hallway. There was nowhere to hide. My eyes fell on the grand, sweeping curtains that covered the large bay window in the front of the house. They were thick, velvet, and floor-to-ceiling. It was a flimsy hiding place, but it was the only one I had. I slipped behind them, pressing my body flat against the cold glass of the window, my breath held tight in my chest. The beam of the phone's flashlight preceded him. He emerged from the dining room, his movements slow, cautious. "Marco," he whispered, his voice a low, dangerous growl. He swept the light across the empty hallway. He saw the empty space where his partner had been. He saw the overturned chair. "Marco!" he hissed, his voice now tight with alarm. He began to search, his light cutting through the darkness, probing the corners of the room. I watched his silhouette through the thin gap in the curtains, my heart pounding so hard I was sure he could hear it. He was a professional. He was methodical. He checked behind the sofa. He checked the dining room again. He was a predator, scenting a trap. His light passed over the curtains where I was hiding. Once, twice. The beam lingered for a heart-stopping moment, and then moved on. He hadn't seen me. He then made a decision that sealed his fate. He decided to go upstairs. He clearly believed that his partner had been ambushed by someone hiding on the second floor. He thought the threat was above him. He had no idea it was now behind him. He started up the staircase, the one where he had fallen before, his movements now slow and infinitely more cautious. As soon as he was halfway up, I slipped out from behind the curtains. This was my chance to end it. I could run. I could take Leo and flee into the night, but I knew they would come after us. They would not stop. I had to neutralize the threat, permanently. I crept to the bottom of the stairs. He was near the top now, his back to me. I looked around for a weapon. The umbrella was in the closet with the unconscious man. The skillet was still lying somewhere on the stairs. I needed something else. My eyes landed on the heavy crystal vase on the hall table, filled with the wilting hydrangeas I had arranged a week ago. It was heavy. It was solid. It would do. I lifted the vase, water sloshing over my hands. I crept up the first few steps of the staircase, my bare feet making no sound on the thick, carpeted runner. He was at the top of the stairs now, his light sweeping across the empty landing. He was looking for me. "All right, you bitch," he growled into the darkness. "You want to play games? Let's play." I raised the heavy crystal vase high above my head, and with a cry that was a mixture of terror and rage, a sound that seemed to come from a place deep within me I never knew existed, I threw it. It flew through the air, a beautiful, glittering arc of death, and it shattered against the back of his head with a sound that was both a sharp, explosive crack and a dull, sickening thud. He stood for a moment, silhouetted against the upstairs window, a strange, surprised look on his face. Then his knees buckled, and he tumbled forward, falling back down the long, curving staircase, his body a dead weight, coming to rest in a broken, unnatural heap at my feet. The house was silent once more, but this time it was the silence of victory. The hunter had become the hunted, and the fragile little bird had revealed herself to be a hawk. The silence in the house after the second man fell was a profound, ringing void. The storm outside had begun to subside, the howling wind replaced by a gentle, steady rain. I stood at the bottom of the staircase, my body trembling, my breath coming in ragged, shallow gasps. The heavy crystal vase, a wedding gift from my parents, lay in 1,000 glittering shards around the broken body of the man at my feet. The water from the vase had mingled with the dark, spreading pool of blood on the polished hardwood floor. I looked at the scene, at the two unconscious or possibly dead men, at the wreckage of my beautiful, ordered home, and I felt not horror, but a strange, surreal detachment. It was as if I were watching a movie, a particularly violent and disturbing one, and I was simply an observer. But the sound of a small, frightened whimper from the direction of the kitchen shattered my daze. Leo. In my fight for survival, I had almost forgotten him. A new, more powerful wave of adrenaline surged through me. I ran to the pantry, my feet crunching on the scattered marbles in the hallway. I fumbled with the latch, my hands shaking. "Leo?" I whispered, my voice a choked cry. "It's me. It's Nana. The password is Starlight." The door creaked open, and he peered out, his small face pale, his eyes wide with fear. "Nana, there were loud noises," he whispered. I scooped him up into my arms, holding him so tightly I could feel his small heart beating against my chest. "I know, my love," I said, my voice thick with tears. "It was just the thunder, a very loud thunder. But it's over now. The storm is passing." I carried him into the living room, carefully avoiding the main hallway. I settled him on the sofa, wrapping him in a thick cashmere blanket. "I want you to stay here and close your eyes," I told him. "I have to go and make a phone call." He nodded, his eyes already drooping with exhaustion. The adrenaline of the night had worn him out. I knew I had to call the police, but what would I tell them? The truth was so fantastic, so unbelievable, that they would never believe it. A 62-year-old housewife, single-handedly taking down 2 professional hitmen? They would think I was crazy, or worse, that I was a liar. And then there was the problem of Jonas. My story would inevitably lead to questions about him, about his past. It would expose him, destroy the new life he had so carefully constructed. It would put him, and all of us, in even greater danger. No, I could not call the local police. My mind raced, searching for another solution. And then I remembered the contents of the metal box, the newspaper clippings, the name of the prosecutor in the Falcone case, the name of the FBI agent who had been in charge of the Witness Protection Program. It was a long shot. The case was 20 years old. The agent was probably retired or dead, but it was the only shot I had. I went back to Jonas's office, my movements now swift and purposeful. I retrieved the metal box from under the desk. I found the clipping I was looking for. The agent's name was David Chen. I then faced my next problem. The phone lines were still down, and my cell phone was useless without a signal. But Jonas, in his obsessive paranoia, had a backup for his backup. In the bottom drawer of his desk, the one I had not been able to open, I found a small emergency satellite phone. I took it back to the living room. Leo was fast asleep on the sofa, his face peaceful in the flickering candlelight. I knelt on the floor beside him, my back against the sofa, and I dialed the only number I could think of, the main switchboard of the FBI headquarters in Washington, D.C. It was 4 a.m. My call was answered by a sleepy, bored-sounding operator. FBI, he mumbled. My name is Alice Miller, I said, my voice low and steady. I need to speak to Agent David Chen. It is a matter of extreme urgency regarding the Falcone case and the Witness Protection Program. There was a long silence on the other end of the line. Agent Chen retired 5 years ago, ma'am, the operator said, and the Falcone case is ancient history. My heart sank. It was a dead end. Please, I said, my voice cracking with a desperation I could no longer hide. You don't understand. My husband is Jonathan Marsetti. They found us. They are in my house. The operator's bored tone vanished, replaced by a sudden, sharp attention. Stay on the line, Mrs. Marsetti, he said, his voice now crisp and professional. Do not hang up. We are tracing your location. The long night was finally over. The aftermath was just beginning. The arrival of the FBI was a quiet, efficient invasion. They did not come with sirens blaring. They came in a fleet of unmarked black sedans, their movements swift and professional in the pre-dawn gloom. They swarmed the property, securing the perimeter, their dark uniforms and tactical gear a stark, jarring contrast to the peaceful, rural landscape. I met them at the front door, wrapped in a blanket, Leo still sleeping soundly on the sofa behind me. The man in charge was not David Chen, but a younger, harder-looking man named Agent Thorne. He had cold, intelligent eyes that seemed to take in everything at once. The broken door, the scattered marbles, the shattered vase, and the 2 bodies, one in the closet, one at the foot of the stairs. Mrs. Marsetti? He asked, his voice low and calm. My name is Alice Miller, I said, my voice steady. My husband is Jonas Miller. I would not give up our new life, our new names, so easily. Thorne gave a small, grim smile. We know who you are, Ma, and we know who they are. He gestured to the 2 men, who were now being attended to by medics. The Rossetti brothers, low-level enforcers for what's left of the Falcone organization. We've been tracking them for weeks. We didn't know where they were going. He looked at me, his eyes filled with a new, grudging respect. It seems you found them first. The story I told them was a carefully edited version of the truth. I told them about the power outage, the knock on the door, the men trying to force their way in. I told them about my grandson, about my fear for his safety. I described, in a detached, factual tone, how I had used my knowledge of the house to defend myself. I described the oil, the marbles, the cast-iron skillet. I told them how I had knocked the younger one out with an umbrella. I told them how the older one had fallen down the stairs in the dark. I did not mention the gun. I did not mention the crystal vase. I presented myself not as a hunter, but as a terrified grandmother who had gotten lucky. It was a more believable narrative, a more sympathetic one. Thorne listened, his expression unreadable. I knew he didn't believe all of it. He was a professional. He could see the geometry of the scene, the brutal efficiency of it. He knew this was not just luck, but he also knew that I was Jonathan Marsetti's wife, a protected asset. And I had just solved a very big problem for him. As the sun began to rise, another car came screaming up the driveway. It was Jonas. He burst out of the car, his face a mask of frantic, desperate fear. He saw the FBI agents, the ambulances, and he stopped dead, his eyes searching frantically for me. He saw me standing on the porch, and he ran to me, his arms wrapping around me in a crushing, desperate hug. Alice, he whispered into my hair. Oh God, Alice, I'm so sorry. I should have been here. I did not hug him back. I stood stiffly in his arms, the chasm of his 20-year lie, a cold, hard wall between us. Agent Thorne approached us. Mr. Marsetti, he said, his voice formal, we need to talk. And so, The second, more difficult reckoning began. In the cold light of day, in my own living room, surrounded by federal agents, the full story of Jonas's past finally came out. He told me everything. His life as a young, ambitious mob lawyer, his growing disillusionment and fear, his decision to cooperate with the FBI, the years spent in hiding, moving from one anonymous town to another, before he had met me. "I wanted to tell you, Alice," he said, his eyes pleading, "so many times. But how could I? I had to protect you. I had to keep you safe from all of this." "Protect me?" I said, my voice a low, cold fury. "You didn't protect me, Jonas. You lied to me. You treated me like a child, like a fool. You built our entire life on a foundation of secrets. Did you really think so little of me? Did you really believe I was so weak that I couldn't handle the truth?" The question hung in the air between us, a brutal, unanswerable indictment of our entire marriage. He had spent his life protecting me from a danger he thought was outside. He had never realized that the greatest danger to our marriage was not the mob. It was him. It was the secrets he kept. It was his lack of faith in the woman he claimed to love. The life we had known was over. The quiet, predictable rhythm was gone, shattered forever. We were no longer Jonas and Alice Miller, the retired sales executive and his quiet, domestic wife. We were Jonathan and Alice Marcetti, a mob witness and his unlikely, formidable protector, and I had no idea what came next. The days that followed were a blur of debriefings, legal meetings, and difficult, painful conversations. The FBI moved us to a secure location, a sterile, anonymous hotel room that felt more like a prison than a safe house. The Rossetti brothers, both of whom had survived my domestic assault, were in federal custody, their silence ensuring that the remnants of the Falcone organization would be scrambling for cover for years to come. The immediate threat was over, but the personal fallout had just begun. Jonas, or Jonathan, as I now struggled to think of him, was a stranger to me. He was no longer the charming, slightly boring man I had married. He was a man with a dark, violent past, a man who had lived a life I could barely comprehend, and I was a stranger to him. He looked at me now not with the old, familiar, condescending affection, but with a new, unsettling mixture of awe and fear, and a deep, profound respect. The porcelain doll had shattered, and in its place was a woman made of steel and shadow. Our conversations were stilted, awkward. We were two people who had shared a bed for 40 years, but who no longer knew how to speak to each other. The foundation of our shared reality had been a lie, and without it, we were adrift. "We'll have to move again," Agent Thorne told us one day. "New names, new city, a clean slate." Jonas nodded, a look of weary resignation on his face. This was the rhythm of his life, the endless cycle of running and hiding. But I shook my head. "No," I said, my voice quiet but firm. Both men looked at me, surprised. "I am not running," I said, looking directly at my husband. "I have spent my entire life living in the shadow of your fear. I have lived in a house you chose, in a life you designed, under a name that was not even my own. I will not do it anymore." "Alice, you don't understand," Jonas began, his voice pleading. "They will never stop looking for me. It's not safe." "Then we will make it safe," I said. "We will not hide. We will fight. We will use the full force of the law, of the media, of public opinion. We will expose them. We will dismantle them. We will drag them into the light. The only way to kill a shadow is to flood it with light." It was a bold, audacious plan, a plan born of a newfound strength I was only just beginning to understand. Thorne looked intrigued. Jonas looked terrified. In the end, it was my plan that won. We did not run. We stayed, and we fought. With the resources of the FBI and the story of my own incredible survival, we launched a public campaign against the remnants of the Falcone organization. My story, the story of the grandmother who took down 2 mob hitmen on Halloween night, became a media sensation. I became a symbol, an unlikely icon of female empowerment and quiet domestic strength. The legal battle was long and grueling, but in the end, we won. The last vestiges of the Falcone family were dismantled, their leaders imprisoned, their power broken forever. The life we rebuilt was not the same as the one we had lost. It couldn't be. The quiet suburban peace was gone, replaced by a new, more complicated, and more honest reality. Jonathan, retired. He spent his days in the garden, his hands in the earth, a man finally at peace with his own past. Our marriage, too, was rebuilt on a new foundation of radical honesty. There were no more secrets between us. He learned to see me not as a fragile doll, but as his partner, his equal, his protector. And I learned to see him not as a liar, but as a survivor, a man who had done the best he could to protect the people he loved, in the only way he knew how. One evening, A year after that terrible Halloween night, we were sitting on the porch of our country house, the same house where I had fought for my life. Leo was there, chasing fireflies in the twilight. Jonas took my hand. "I'm sorry, Alice," he said softly, "for the lies, for not trusting you." "I know, Jonas," I said, "and I forgive you." And as I said the words, I knew they were true. The shadow of his past was finally gone. The house was no longer a place of secrets, but a place of peace. I looked at my grandson, his small face lit with joy as he ran through the darkening yard. He was safe. He was happy. The night of the Halloween storm had not brought ghosts or goblins to my door. It had brought a reckoning. It had shattered my world, yes, but it had also shown me a strength I never knew I possessed. It had taught me that the brightest starlight is often only visible in the deepest, darkest night, and I was no longer afraid of the dark. Thank you very much for watching. Share with those who also like stories, subscribe, and tell me in the comments if you liked my story. Cheers.